Today I'm going to walk you through a skirt I recently made. There's a few things I really like about this skirt. One, it's one of those ones where you really don't need a pattern, you just need your basic measurements. In this case, just your waist measurement. And then you can easily adjust where it sits on your waist as well as how long it is. The other thing that's really cool about it is that this fabric, this stripy jewel-toned fabric, I've used in a number of other projects. I kind of love when a fabric finds its way into your life in different pockets. I don't know if the camera's picking it up, but the texture of the weave is pretty visible, which I think is nice. It's like these jewel tones, but it has like a naturalness to it. There's probably some real terms for that kind of thing that I don't know. The skirt has a small waistband, a placket of buttons all down the front center, 2 big pleats in the front, and then a bunch of smaller pleats in the back. Let's do it. So here's the plan. Using box pleats to add a bit of flare down here. My waist, where I want the waistband to be, is 32.5 inches. I think that down here, I essentially want that doubled, but I'm kind of just going with how much fabric I can get away with. I measured the front portion of my waist to be 18 inches. So that means the back portion of my waist is 14.5 inches. The back portion is the simplest. I'm just going to double it, and half of that will be kind of sucked up with the pleats. So I need a 29-inch wide piece of fabric. The front piece is going to be 2 different pieces, and there's going to be a placket down the middle. So I have to add 2 inches to both of those pieces for the placket. 18 inches is my actual measurement in the front. I want to multiply that by 2 so that half of that gets sucked up by the pleats. But then I want to divide it by 2 because I want it to be across 2 different pieces. So that's my little times 2 divided by 2 here, which just brings us back to 18. But then I'm adding that 2 inches for the placket on both sides. So you're taking your front waist measurement and you're adding 2.5 inches, and you need 2 of those at desired length. And then you're taking your back waist measurement and you're multiplying it by 2 and adding 1 inch seam allowance, and you need 1 of those at desired length. I am setting up my placket that will run down the center on both the front pieces. So I've interfaced, I cut 1 inch wide interface pieces and then iron fused that to the edge of one of my front pieces. And then I used that interfacing. I made sure I was really careful in cutting that to be exactly 1 inch wide, because then I can use that as kind of a guide for folding it, pressed it, folded again, and pressed it. And then I can just top stitch that in place and it'll be ready for buttons or buttonholes. So I'll do the same thing on the other side as well. I've sewn my placket in place, but it looks nice. So I've sewn the pocket piece to my front piece. I'm going to do the same thing on all 4 side seam pieces, the 2 fronts and the back. I'm going to press this nice so that I can get this on. This is just interfacing to give the pocket seam a little bit of strength. And then I'm going to press the seam allowance in this so I can understitch. So then I will top stitch here, and that creates a nice understitch to keep it crisp. So I've got my 2 front pieces on top of my back piece. I'm going to sew those side seams, leaving a gap for the pocket hole, close up my pockets, figure out my pleats, figure out my waistband, hem, buttons, buttonholes. I'm playing around with the pleats a little bit. I don't know how well you can see, but here's my placket. On this side I have 1 pleat and then 1 on the back. And then on the other side I did 2 pleats and 2 in the back to try to understand what I would prefer. I think I like the one pleat better right now, actually. It's also not pressed, which I think is making it harder for me to tell what I want to do. I'm going to press it nicely and then measure out what one pleat on each of the fronts would look like. And then maybe, I think, 4 pleats on the back, and then put it back on, pin it, and see how that looks. This is the front piece we're looking at right now. My whole front is 18 inches, and this is 21 inches, but this is also only half of the front. So each of these halves of the front, I want to be 9.5 inches to allow for a little bit of overlap on the placket. So like center front is in the center of the placket. The placket's 1 inch wide, so 9.5 inches for each half. So maybe I do 5. And then from this side, we're doing 4.5. And then we're just kind of bringing those two guys together. Okay, I think we want it to be over this way more. So let's try again. So 4.5 this way, and then 5 this way. So what that looks like. All right, does that seem better? I think that seems better. Cool. And then I'll copy those marks on over to my other front piece. And then for the back, I'm going to do a similar thing. So the back is about 17 times 2, which is 34. And my whole back is only supposed to be 14. So it's 20 inches that needs to be at 8.5. So I've marked center back, and I want 5 inches from each of my pleats. So 1.25 inch is there. That's going to be like where the fold fits under. And then we have 5 inches of actual fold. And then another 2.5 inches, because it's 2 pleats worth of folds, right here. And then 5 inches here. All right, I'll do those on the other side as well. Okay, so I've pressed it, and I've put in 1 pleat at the front and 2 at the back, just on one side so I can see. And I think that's what I'm gonna go with. So I'll sew those up and then try it on. I made a seriously dumb mistake. Wanna see? Dumb, but very fixable, which is fine. So I had made those long pleats 5 inches from the top of the waistband down to where I stopped sewing the pleat, right? But like, I put it on. I actually already took out the front ones because it was working so poorly. And of course, it doesn't really fit. Like the pocket, when I had the pleat front ones in, the pocket is like bulging like this. I calculated the pleats at my waist, but as soon as you remove, like as soon as you go down a little bit from the waist, definitely when you go down 5 inches from the waist, it's not the same measurement. It gets bigger and bigger as you go down. So I can't have a pleat that keeps the waist measurement down 5 whole inches. I'm going to unpick each of these pleats up until about maybe 2 inches down, 1.5 inches, and see how that fits. All right, I have shortened my pleats so that they're just 1.5 inches, half of which will be come seam allowance for where I attach the waistband. And I've got a bunch on the back and then just 2 big ones on the front. I think that works. It's a little kilty, eh? I now have my waistband pieces. This is the back, and my 2 front pieces. They're 3 inches wide. I've added interfacing, and now I'm just gonna sew them together. I did press them in half before sewing them together because I think it makes it a little bit easier to press them later. So this is my skirt. This is the waistband, which I've sewn on. This is the placket here. And now I've got to make a nice little corner at like the top center. So to do that, I'll have my seam allowance on the waistband pointing up towards the waistband. And then I'll push this over, and right along my crease at the center of the waistband, I'm going to fold it in the opposite direction, so right sides are facing. And with this material in particular, it's nice because I'm making sure the stripes line up so it's staying on grain. And then I'll pin that. And then I'm going to sew on this underside from this corner just outside the skirt fabric up to here. Once I've done that, it's going to look like this. I can flip it like so. Depending on how lazy I'm feeling, I'll either just serge this and then sew it down by stitching in the ditch, or sometimes I'll just do a nice top stitch, like if I think that would look nice aesthetically up here. But if you wanted to be real fancy, what you would do is take it to the sewing machine and fold this piece under and then press it. I think I might do that actually. And then press it so it's nice and all the raw edges are hidden away. And then you could either stitch in the ditch or top stitch from the front side so that it looks really nice and neat. I just made a video about my buttonhole adventures with my new buttonhole sewing machine attachment. So I'm not going to cover that process here. I'm also not going to show you the hem because that's kind of boring. But here she is.